Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Judith Rose, Acting Director of Villa Albertine and Acting Cultural Counselor of the French Embassy in the US, and it is a great honor to be with you this evening to celebrate the 2023 laureates of the Albertine Translation Prize. As you probably know, the publishing industry in the US is one of the most competitive in the world. Although many US publishers do extraordinary work to highlight the voices of foreign authors, the number of books translated from other languages remains a very small percentage, 3% in fact, of the total number of books published in the US. However, I am pleased to say that French remains the most translated language in the US publishing market. And I'd like to salute the commitment of a community of highly skilled professionals, including publishers, translators, academics, and agents, who passionately advocate for French and Francophone authors. Among the 7 grant programs offered by Villa Albertine and the Albertine Foundation, the Albertine Translation Fund plays a key role in supporting this community. This program encourages and supports publishers who take a chance on publishing new French and Francophone works. Open to all categories of books, including fiction, nonfiction, children's books, comics, and poetry, the program focuses on works that have been published in France within the last 10 years. In 2023, the Albertine Translation Committee offered grants in support of 18 translation projects, reflecting the diversity and richness of the French publishing landscape. I'd like to warmly thank the 13 members of our committee, some of whom have been with us for many years now, for their dedication to this program and their exceptional expertise. Among the 18 works that received funding from Albertine Translation in 2023, the committee chose 2 titles for the Albertine Translation Prize, one in fiction and one in nonfiction. The prize recognizes not only the exceptional quality of the original work, but also the excellence of the translation. We will reveal the 2 winning books and hear from their translators shortly, but please allow us to hold you in suspense for a moment longer. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that the program accepts applications for French works that do not yet have an American publisher. If the project is selected, the French publisher, agent, or translator will have 1 year to find an American publisher with guaranteed financial support. So I invite publishers in the room to consult our website or the leaflets available this evening to find out more about these titles that could be a beautiful addition to your list. Before handing the mic to Asa Benyamed, representing Van Cleef Arpels, whose partnership made this ceremony possible, I'd like to thank Van Cleef, as well as the Florence Gould Endowment for Literary Exchange and the Institut français for their generous support. I'd also like to extend my warmest thanks to the boards of the Albertine and Albertine Books Foundations for their commitment to literature and translation, to Words Without Borders for partnering with us on this event, and of course to tonight's Master of Ceremonies, writer, editor, and journalist Adam Dalva. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Villa Albertine's book department for all the energy they put into encouraging translations and promoting French authors in the United States. Thank you for your attention, and Asa, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Asa Benyamed. I'm the PR director at Van Cleef Arpels, and I'm delighted to celebrate with you today this 2024 edition of the Albertine Translation Prize. Since its founding in 1906, Van Cleef Arpels has made it a priority to support the arts on both sides of the Atlantic, be it with our initiative to foster the arts through education with l'École, School of Jewelry Arts, or with our support of contemporary dance with Dance Reflections by Van Cleef Arpels initiative. The Maison continuously aims to strengthen the passion and excitement for the literary arts through our support of French literature, but also educational organizations in the US. The Albertine Prize represents our commitment to promoting French-American cultural and intellectual exchange. Today, we are thrilled to honor the two winners of the Albertine Translation Prize, whose creativity, vision, and prose have captured our imagination. Please join me in congratulating them for their beautiful achievements, and we look forward to supporting many more works this prize will recognize in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name's Adam Dalva. I'm your Master of Ceremonies. Someone said, are you going to rap? And I'm not going to rap, but I am a critic and a journalist and an editor of translated literature at Guernica and Words Without Borders. About 2 more minutes and then you get to find out who the winners are. I realized as I was preparing these remarks that I'm getting a little grumpy because my feeling on a very beautiful, very special night like this is often the same feeling. Why aren't there more very special nights like this? This is such a fabulous prize. This is a night that celebrates translation, connecting across cultures. This is the rare kind of prize where our winners are plucked from a group of people who are also winners. Everyone has benefited from being on these lists, this marvelous list of 18 books that I've been reading voraciously for the last few weeks. Tonight we're celebrating original contemporary work, we're celebrating French writing, we're celebrating original translation, and we're going to cover some of the cost of the publishing and translation, which is very important. Most of all, we're celebrating 2 translators for 2 very special works of art. I was moved on Albertine's website to read that one of the goals of this prize, and I'm quoting, is to make sure that these books find a good home. A good home. And I thought, a good home, that is what they said to me about the dog I rescued. Will you give him a good home? And as a judge and as an editor, I get a feeling on nights like this that's pretty similar to how I feel about my dog, who I feel like I saved. And like a good book, he's usually in bed with me in the morning instead of where he should be, in the living room. And like a good book, I spend almost all my time talking about him, boring everyone around me. So this is a work of rescue, this type of prize. Many books found publishers thanks to this prize. Think of that. Books that didn't have publishers have found them because of this program. Especially in a year where translation, I think, we don't need to go into detail on this, but I think translation feels more important than ever. And I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. The 2 winners have a lot in common, although they're also very different, as you're about to hear. Both books are, I've come to believe, in some way interested in understanding. They're both interested in the act of translating oneself and others. Both made me see art in a different way, and both make a beautiful case for why a prize like this matters so much. And now, finally, I'll introduce the first prize winner in the nonfiction category. Congratulations to Catherine Porter for her translation of Philippe Descola's Les Formes Divisibles, une anthropologie de la figuration, which will be published by Polity Books. I will read her bio, and then she'll join us. Catherine was born in 1941 and completed a PhD at Yale University in 1972. She is currently a visiting scholar at Cornell and is the translator of numerous books in the critical humanities, 56 books, including titles by authors such as Baptiste Morisot, Luc Boltanski, Bruno Latour, and Avital Ronell. Catherine.
I am honored and humbled by this prize, since the credit must largely go to this magnificent book, which I wanted to wave at you. It's heavy, it's 768 pages. Let me try to give you a very brief glimpse of its conceptual scope. In his groundbreaking earlier book, Par-delà Nature et Culture, Beyond Nature and Culture, published in 2005, anthropologist Philippe Descola developed a hypothesis about the way human societies construct and transmit their understanding of the world and their place in it. He identified 4 structurally contrastive approaches to what he calls worlding, and I quote, "These approaches are based on the types of resemblance and difference that humans detect between themselves and non-humans on a dual register, physical and moral," end of the quote. The earlier book was based on field studies and a wide array of textual resources. In Les Formes du Visible, The Forms of the Visible and Anthropologie of Figuration, he explores the imagery produced in societies exemplifying the same 4 modes: animism, totemism, allegorism, and naturalism. Analyzing images and objects ranging from cave paintings to contemporary art, he studies not only their form, content, and style, but also the materials used and the way they are shaped, the purposes to which the objects or images are put, and the agency with which they may be credited. He takes particular interest in perspectives and points of observation, those of the image makers and those of the viewers, from singular and linear to multiple and multidirectional. To conclude, I'll jump straight ahead to naturalism, which comes last in the sequence of modes for a reason. Descola locates the origin of naturalism in 15th century Italian painting, where the adoption of linear perspective brought artists and viewers together to contemplate a new totality, thus sharply distinguishing subject from object, humans from nature. As the author observed, and I quote again, "The vision of the moderns," that's us, "has been so long distorted by the habit of linear perspective that it has struggled to identify as a choice in other pictorial traditions, by far the most common in human history, the phenomenon of constructing images on the basis of multiple positions of observation," end quote. Descola's book gives us a basis for examining our own image-making traditions and practices from a comparative anthropological perspective, and invites us to consider the broader implications for the vulnerable planet we share of a worlding process that has led us, in part through the images we produce, to see ourselves, us modern humans, as somehow separate from and superior to what we like to call nature. Thank you.
Everyone, I am Philippe Descola talking to you from Paris. I cannot say how delighted I was to learn that Catherine Porter was to receive the 2023 Albertine Prize for translation of my book Les Formes du Visible, une anthropologie de la figuration. When Polity Press decided to publish an English edition of the book, they asked me if I had any preference for a translator. My former translator and friend, Janet Lloyd, having retired, I immediately thought of someone whom my friend Bruno Latour had repeatedly told me how much he valued the translations she had done of his own books, Catherine Porter. I cannot say how happy I was when I heard that Catherine had accepted the job. And it's not a meager job. The book is 750 pages long in French. It straddles many scholarly domains between anthropology, history of art, philosophy, aesthetics, psychology, and it is not devoid of a few tricky neologisms. Last but not least, my way of writing in French, which has been defined by a critic some years ago when appearing in translation in English as a typical Gallic prose. I know not whether this is a compliment. Is far from easy to translate. So it's a formidable task that was laying ahead of Catherine, and she nevertheless embarked on it with enthusiasm and diligence. I warmly congratulate you, Catherine Porter, for the Albertine Prize, and I thank also the members of the jury for their insight. I cannot wait to see the completed translation, the end result. Good evening to everyone. Enjoy the reception and I suppose also the refreshments. Bye-bye.
I could listen to that all night. That was fantastic. But back to me. I now have the pleasure of announcing our second winning translator for fiction, Carolyn Ernst, for her translation of Joseph Kai's Restless, which was published by Street Noise Books in September 2023. Carolyn works as a freelance travel and lifestyle writer and photographer, and she has recently taken up French translation. So I think one book instead of 56, we were saying upstairs. A lifelong Francophile, Carolyn began learning French as a child while living near Paris with her family. She received a BS from the Rochester Institute of Technology and has continued her French studies at FAAF in NYC. She loves French films and travels to France as often as possible. Carolyn.
I would first like to express my deep gratitude to Villa Albertine for this recognition of my work on Restless, and to Liz Francis of Street Noise Books for offering me the opportunity to take on this beautiful project. Dieu merci, j'ai dit oui, n'est-ce pas? Translating Joseph Kai's provocative coming-of-age narrative took me on a journey of discovery. I not only learned of the fictionalized challenges he faced as a queer artist living in Beirut, but I delighted in the beauty of his interior creative mind, which he generously shares with us in this story. I was struck by the way that creating art is not only a solace and an outlet for his narrator, Samar, but also a means of connecting with the supportive community, which is his lifeline. I am honored to have brought this bold, personal, and revealing book from the French to the English-speaking world. As its translator, I was deeply committed to lending a cultural, historical, and political understanding to a new group of readers in a way that they could relate and feel connected to. To do that, it was critical to me to employ language that is relatable to English language readers without losing the nuances of the French language and the richness of the Lebanese context. The reality of what life is like for the queer community in Beirut adds to the poignancy and urgency of Samar's life perspective and personal journey. I am deeply struck by Samar's rumination. I also think about my own body. I ask myself what it would be like without the weight of rejection, threat, and fear. I would really like to know myself without that. It's very, very provocative. Though this perspective is unique to Samar's personal coming-of-age story, coming of age as a queer man in Beirut, Lebanon, the themes are clearly universal. I shared this phrase with a friend recently who was dumbstruck by it. It took his breath away and truly pierced him with a moment of introspection and deep realization of its truth for himself in a completely different life and cultural context. Human desire, longing for self-actualization, and a desire for personal freedom and expression is relatable across cultures, genders, and sexual orientations, as is a fear of rejection, both real and imagined. Art heals, connects, and transports us. I am humbled and thrilled that my translation will enable new readers to experience this unique story and perhaps to feel a connection to Samar and his chosen family. In closing, most importantly, I want to thank Joseph Kai for not only writing this incredible book, but illuminating Restless with his stunning and truly fearless illustrations. I hope this has inspired you to experience this world for yourself. The book will be available to look at and perhaps see a little bit of yourself in it as well.
This is Joseph Kai. I'm the author of Restless, the graphic novel. It got recently translated into English by Carolyn Ernst and published with Street Noise Books. So I'm reaching out on the occasion of the Albertine Prize for Translation and the nomination of Carolyn Ernst. Carolyn, congrats, and I would like to sincerely thank you for this amazing work that you've done on this book. As I told you before, I was very happy to read your translation draft, and I felt a lot of attention to details and a lot of care and precision into rendering these dialogues and preserving all the complexities that these characters have. So thank you very much again for your incredible input in this project, and I hope that you win this competition. I would like also to extend my appreciation to Liz Francis, the person behind Street Noise Books, without whom all this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you, Liz, for trusting my story. It's really amazing to work with you and see the amount of love you put into your projects. And thank you for making this story accessible to a whole new audience that I wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise. And finally, I would like to express my gratitude for Villa Albertine, who sponsored my author tour in the US, so in North America, in Canada, in Boston, and in New York. Thank you very much for this great experience. I never visited the US before and never talked about my work or showed my graphic novels there. It was beautiful to meet students, readers, and people who are even discovering comics, and to talk about them about this, talk with them about this and about Beirut. So thank you all, and I hope that you spend an amazing evening. Bye bye.
So now the translators will do a Q&A with me, but in addition, I'd like to introduce Liz Francis, who you've heard a lot about in the last few minutes. For 15 years, she worked as an art director and book designer in the big publishing houses of New York, and in the wake of the 2016 presidential election, you know the one, she became passionately driven to advocate for the power of love and compassion. She created Street Noise Books to provide a platform from which truth can be told, a place to share our stories, to foster community, and a means to build a future where all people are free and respected. So please, all three, join us. You can take pictures.
I want to do like an Ellen thing. We should do like a selfie of all. I'm not really like.
You do whatever you need. Hi. Wow, this is great. So I'll be asking questions for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then, don't be frightened, we'll take a couple of audience questions. So ruminate a bit if you have any questions you'd like to ask. I'd like to start with a question for the translators. I was very moved watching those videos, and I could see and sense that you were too. We're celebrating translation as an act of exchange and an act of generosity. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about not just the experience of watching the videos, of course, but the experience of finding these books and working with these people, because I think we see how human a connection it is on a night like tonight.
I was really intimidated by this project when it was presented to me, because it didn't feel like something that I had a lot of familiarity with, quite honestly. But I saw it as a really positive personal and professional challenge, and I embarked on it full on, and became so caught up in the world of it and felt so connected to the project that I'm not sure if this is exactly answering your question, but through this really became connected with a whole world of thoughts and ideas that, of course, I connected with. And ultimately, I did meet the author personally, and it really came a full circle that I had the opportunity to connect with him on that level as well.
How about you, Catherine?
A different experience. I was intimidated for different reasons. The scope and vastness of the topics covered. And I...
A little closer to the mic.
Okay. I had met Descola briefly, but I haven't seen him since I started working on this project. I leave for Paris tomorrow night for 3 months, and I count on working closely with him because I certainly have questions. He mentioned Bruno Latour, and I have translated about, I think, 7 of his books, working with him very closely on each one, except the last, of which he read the proofs 3 weeks before he died. But that relationship, and others I've had over the years with the authors, have been really constructive and enjoyable human connections and very useful for fine-tuning translations.
I love the way that how organic these projects feel. Mm-hmm. Our job tonight was partly to talk about maybe a frightening subject, an interesting one, which is how translated books get published, which I'm sure is a question some people in the audience have. So I was wondering if maybe we can start with Carolyn and Liz and then go to Catherine, since we have both publisher and translator. In this case, was it a pitch? Did you find the book? Did you find the translator? And then I'd love to hear that for you as well.
I loved when I realized that I discovered this book. It was called L'Intranquille, and it was published by Casterman. I discovered it at the Paris book market, which Villa Albertine so generously sent me to attend in Paris. I thought that I had just had my dream come true when they said, "Do you want to go to Paris for 3 days?" I was like, yeah. So, and I remember meeting with Noel Wen at that wonderful, very small, little intimate book market. It was the first year that they had done it. And she told me about this amazing book with this Lebanese queer man who writes about activism and the importance of community and the intersection between art and sexuality and identity and politics. And so I loved that. But I've found other books. The first French book that I published, I discovered at the London Book Fair when I was just getting started with a new publishing company and didn't know, how do you even find books to publish? And I went and I thought, well, wait a minute, the French, they do graphic novels really well. I should talk to them. Let me see what they're doing. And I met with someone and we published a book called Vagina Love, which was called Vagine Tonique in French. That was Lily Sohn. So And then I found Carolyn. I've known her for a long time. We used to work together. And I just had a feeling that she would get this project. She would understand it. I knew she had never translated a book before, but I just thought I wanted... Street Noise does work with debut authors a lot, and also with debut translators, debut editors, debut book designers. We're sort of a company that gives people chances.
Mm-hmm. And as a debut translator, this book is gorgeous and is very graphic in both senses of the word. I was struck because I think this must be a challenging book to have translated in many ways. So can you talk about, as a debut translator, although I know you've written in French before, that approach?
It was a challenge. You know, as I said in my remarks, it was really important to me not to lose the richness of the story and the context. I did a lot of research on Lebanon, Lebanese history, Lebanese art. You know, once I started to embark on the project and saw where it was going, I had to stop and really understand the context so that I wasn't making assumptions. It was really, really important to me to do that. And when you look through the book, you'll see that I did footnote a few things that I just thought it was really important to kind of point out with an asterisk so that the reader understands the cultural context. There's reference, as an example, to a singer that was really popular in Lebanon at a particular time that obviously really resonated with the story, but wouldn't necessarily resonate with an English-speaking reader. So I footnoted it so that they kind of understood what the point of that, was. I really challenged myself not to lose any of that adds to the richness of the story. So that was the challenge to me, not to lose it, but also to use English language that really resonates with the target audience, and to not necessarily speak the way that in the book, the way that I would speak. And I was very concerned about making sure that idiomatic phrases in French were translated properly in English, that if there were any nuances to them, that I caught that. So I did a lot of research on that too.
Although these books have very different languages, they each strike me as languages that have challenges. Catherine, you are obviously in a position where you are choosing, I think, what to translate. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, how you go about choosing your next project. Are you using a similar approach from writer to writer, or is he a new kind of terrain for you to discover as a translator?
In my experience, every writer is a new kind of terrain. I often make positive choices when approached by certain publishers with whom I've worked before. Polity is high on that list. It has a wonderful list of authors and topics in which I'm perennially interested. And also, while I hadn't translated Descola before, I knew his work, and I knew that it paralleled in some ways the work that I did know very well of Bruno Latour concerning nature and culture. They have different takes. There's a passage in this book where Descola points out just how he differs from Bruno, but they were friends, as you could see. And it was certainly a challenge, but Polity gave me until January 2025. They've since pulled back to October, but I think I'll make it.
You were kind enough to share a short kind of prologue with me so I could prepare for this event. And I was saying it took me about as long to read as the whole graphic novel. He's quite a dense writer.
Yes.
And yet your translation is unbelievably lucid and clear. And so I was thinking about how challenging that must be to find a lucidity when you're translating such dense language.
It is always a challenge. What I find myself doing is shortening sentences, shortening paragraphs, rearranging phrases within a sentence, sometimes adding, though, because I have to specify pronouns where the French gender and number gives you the clue. They could be anything in the previous 2 or 3 sentences. So that kind of work, there's a certain kind of repetitiveness in some French writing that I try to notice and reduce at least. And then there's the whole question of the vocabulary of the different fields. And I have no experience translating works on art per se, so I'm having to learn new words and making sure that I've got the right one, the right English equivalent. There are a couple I have on a list already to ask Descola about.
So maybe zooming out a bit for the three of you, I've been thinking a lot, as I think we all have, about the role of translation and how it's shifted. There's been a move lately, which I think we're all very happy about, to credit translators on the covers of books instead of just in the back jacket or in the back material. I'm wondering, maybe all three of you, maybe starting here, if you could talk a bit about how you see translation shifting in the last couple of years and what you kind of see in the future.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm a real expert in that because Street Noise Books is a very young publisher. We launched our first book in May of 2020. And we've published 20 books so far. But I'm very proud to say that we've published way more than 3% or whatever, 0.3%. We've published four of the 20 are in translation. So that's whatever percent that is. But I don't, so far I have not credited the translator on the cover because my main aim in publishing these books is getting them out to a wide audience. And as a graphic novel, I know that there are graphic novels where they credit the translator on the cover, but I didn't want to draw attention to that. I wanted to draw attention to the universality of these stories, and also to the particular culture that they are rooted in. But I really wanted them to be as accessible as possible, because Street Noise, I founded it in order to humanize people's stories all around the world. And I think what you were alluding to earlier, I do feel that at this time and place, it's even more important than ever before that we know people's stories from all over the globe, because it's so much harder to hate someone when you know their story, when you've heard them tell it in their own words and draw it in their own hand. So we've published 2 French translations, 1 Spanish, and 1 Arabic from a Palestinian author.
No one tell Jenny Croft, but that all makes sense. Now, you were mentioning upstairs that you also have experience as a ghostwriter.
Yes.
And I was thinking of ghostwriting and translation as kind of kissing cousins in some ways. So the same general question, but also I'd love to hear a bit about that.
I think the mic should be closer. Oh, sorry. I'm surprised you're asking me about that, but that's okay. It's a lot of lifestyle writing, mostly lifestyle, travel, food, lifestyle-oriented writing. A lot of it was broadly published, not under my name, obviously, as a ghostwriter. Of course, I can take my my personal pride in that. But yes, I have done quite a bit of writing.
And how does that play into your understanding of translation?
That's actually really good. That's a really good question. A lot of the writing that I did was transposing. It's coming to me now. Transposing interviews with people, condensing them, consolidating them, keeping, maintaining the voice. So I think it does go hand in hand, 100%.
And are you going to continue to translate now that you've won an award for your first translation? So I assume you're going to...
I'm an award-winning translator
You
now.
are?
I have only up to go from here.
Absolutely. Stay right up here. Now, Catherine, I think you probably see the state of play after your years in translation. So.
Yes, I think I can address the question from a more political standpoint in terms of translation politics, because both as a member of the PEN Translation Committee and the Modern Language Association, in which I played an active role for a while, and declared that 2008 or 9 was the year of translation. And with PEN, I've been involved in crafting a sample contract, the importance of having the author's name, the translator's name appear on the cover is a theme that comes up all the time. I can see a difference between its importance in the kind of work I do and in the kind of work you're doing. But it does seem important to have book reviewers also, when they're praising a book that has been translated. It is always a pleasure to see that they're also praising the translator, without whom they would not have met this wonderful book.
As an editor of reviews of books in translation, I always find myself saying, can we have more than one sentence in the second paragraph about a deftly translated book? It is such an art form. Do you think, in thinking of criticism, and maybe after this question we'll take a couple from the audience, how, if you were writing about translation, we have many great critics in the room, colleagues of mine, how would you think a translation should be written about by a critic, perhaps one who doesn't speak the language of origin?
Well, I'm always gratified just to see it mentioned as a translation, and the name of the translator mentioned as well. For a book review, the focus should be, of course, on the book, but it's also useful once in a while for a reviewer to step back and think and reflect and write about translations as a process, and about the different kinds of translations. In France, both literary translation in the sense of not nonfiction, and what we call nonfiction, I prefer to call expository prose, because nonfiction is somehow always secondary. But here, even in the PEN group with which I work, literary translation in the narrow sense is predominant and the focus of most discussions. So I sometimes feel, especially when I was in the academic world, that I was a part of a minority, and a minority within the minority, as a translator of expository prose.
I'm going to be a greedy moderator because a very natural follow-up has come up. Graphic fiction, I think, also is often treated as secondary to other kinds of fiction. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, I think this very beautiful book benefits hugely from being a graphic novel. I would not want it to be anything else. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about this graphic form.
Could you take
Or you.
Yeah,
Sure. Street Noise just focuses on graphic novels, and I think the reason we've chosen to do that is that there's just a very powerful way when you combine images and words together. For people who aren't comfortable with graphic novels, just dive in and get started, because it's a beautiful interaction between different parts of your brain when you're reading the book. The one part of your brain is processing the words, and the other part is experiencing the art. And so it becomes really a very different kind of experience reading a graphic novel. And this particular book, Joseph is an amazing artist, and his art is very otherworldly, and he chose to draw it specifically in and use only Pantone colors, which, if you know what that means from a printing standpoint, it, instead of the regular way that most books are printed, it's these specific inks, and it results in a very bright and sort of a little unnatural look, especially because he chose very sort of clashy colors. And I think that I can't imagine this book without the art. I think the art is so really central to the story.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for 2 audience questions. Oh, I saw a quick hand. I love a very prepared audience member. Why can't all my students be like this? Okay, I think we have a mic coming. I will remind you to speak into the mic. They are not as hot as you think.
I will try to speak into the mic. First of all, thank you for using Pantone color printing. My production heart loves to hear that. As somebody who works in publishing, printing, purely translation work, the first thing that came to mind for me is the big difficulty in translation is I find the double translation. So when you're not just translating from one language, but in a way 2 languages, and writing about queerness in Lebanon, queerness often has its own language constructed around it to protect it, and writing from cave drawings to Italian art, you have a lot of these double translations where you need to reach into languages that may take a lot of extra research or that you don't quite know. I was wondering if both of you would speak to what it was like to do that sort of double translation in your works.
You're asking an incredibly good question. Oh, sorry. You're asking an incredibly good question. Again, I did a lot of research to make sure that I caught all of that because I saw it in the book. One comment that I wanted to make about our last conversation is that this is a very rich story. You know, if you're not familiar with the genre of graphic novels, they're not the comic books that you might be associating them with. This is a very dense, very rich narrative that's illuminated with these beautiful drawings. But to get back to your question, yes, there are two very distinct layers of what you're trying to convey in English in this case. In some cases, it was things that I saw in the pictures that I had to translate somehow into language so that it made sense to the reader, if that makes any sense. But to your point about the queer community, you know, this is something I had to really dive deep into in my mind and try to sort of live it so that I understood the nuances of it. That's a very deep aspect of it as well, and not to be trivialized in the translation, but to use a very light touch with that as well. It's subtle in the book. It's subtle in the original French, so it needs to be subtle in English as well.
In my case, it's a question very often of technical language used by anthropologists in particular communities, and then used by art historians and art critics. And I often find myself vacillating about a choice, settling on one, and then consulting one of the books in the 30-page long bibliography and finding out what the expert term is and going back to make some changes. It's a complicated process, but kind of fun and certainly very rewarding, except I come across a lot of wonderful books that I don't have time to read.
One more audience question. Right up front.
Thank you. Okay, so about 3 years ago, I took a course in French translation, and it entirely revolutionized my conception of literature and was a very formative experience. And there was a project in the end where we had to pick any work and translate it. And I remembered it being a sort of deciphering experience in which firstly you have to directly translate the words into the other language. Second, you have to keep the integrity of the sentence, and the sentence is placed within a paragraph, and that paragraph is placed within the page. But ultimately, the most important thing is that after having read a translation, you have to be able to step back and be confident in the fact that you were translating the original motivation. So what is your strategy when you begin a book, when you tackle a sentence, when you tackle a page? And how often do you remind yourself of the author's original motivation for publishing the work?
I kept that in mind constantly, always top of mind, but clarity is really important. And I'm very concerned about sentence structure and the proper use of language, but sometimes you have to work with the language to make it readable and engaging to the in the new language.
In my case, it's very similar, despite the very different text we've been dealing with. I tend to do a fairly, literal is too strong, but I try to stay fairly close to the structures of the author's sentences and paragraphs as I go through the first draft. But then I do a second draft and a third and a fourth. Each one goes faster, but each one, I always hope, will make the English read more smoothly without losing the author's point or intention. I do think that the author's desire is to be understood in the new language, and that sort of frees me to take what some people might call liberties in changing word order, sometimes making deletions, sometimes making or proposing additions. I work with the authors and say, well, maybe we should explain this a little further for the new audience. So it's a kind of juggling act to keep all those purposes.
I did a lot of re-editing for clarity and consistency as well. I didn't just go forward, I went in circles. But I went back to make sure that it was a consistent tone and consistent use of language within each section of the book.
Now we have two important pieces of business before we head to the cocktail hour. The first is to remind you, and this is very critical, that both these books are available for purchase downstairs, the nonfiction in French and the graphic novel in English, and I deeply encourage you all to go buy both. And the second order of business is that somewhere in this room there is a box, and harrowingly they've asked me to draw two names, and the winners... What?
Wow.
What if... No, I'm going to go through the top. That's more...
No, because then...
Okay, you do
Then
it.
the people on the bottom...
You're right, you got to be fair to the people on the bottom.
Hold on, now open it up and then you can... Okay, you guys can just...
Mix it up. Okay. This is the most audience engagement I've ever seen. We're going to pull two names. We all want to win, it's true. Does someone else want to? Maybe one of the... Do you want to read the names?
Sure.
Okay, we'll have the translators read the names. That will be kind of a nice twist.
The Oscars, one person opens it and then the next person reads it.
Our first winner.
Phil Waba?
Phil Waba? Come on up! Oh, this is great. I'm so glad we're doing this. Beautifully read. Okay. Congratulations, Phil W. Maybe a handwriting class.
I should have put my glasses on before I read that.
That's why I had you read it. And would you like to read the next winner? Here.
Eric Warroad.
Well, that went very smoothly. Thus ends our program. Can we have one last huge round of applause for our winners? Congratulations. And thank you. And the reception is in the next room.